For regular videos on ancient cultures and forgotten civilizations, please subscribe.
What can ancient stones, buried structures, and unearthed artifacts reveal about one of the most disputed migrations in history? Join me as I examine the archaeological evidence bearing on the question of a migration of Indo-Aryan speaking peoples into or out of the Indian subcontinent. Does mainstream archaeology have it right? Did Indo-Aryans come to India in the second millennium BCE? Or is a better case to be made that Indo-Aryans are indigenous to India? I've already discussed the genetic evidence in another video, and I will do one on the linguistic evidence soon. But the journey we will take in this video will be grounded entirely in the physical traces left behind, enigmatic clues that might help us to paint a picture of movement and cultural transformation. Together, we'll uncover how archaeology illuminates this monumental chapter in human history. The story may lie in the earth, so let's dig in. What is the theory of Indo-Aryan migration? It's the proposal that a group of people from a specific language family migrated into the Indian subcontinent in the second millennium BCE. That's between 2000 and 1000 BCE, and settled there. Whether they did so largely peacefully or there was conflict is not really relevant to the theory itself, but this migration is not believed to have happened all at once, but rather was a slow trickle in over an extended period of time. These people are posited to have entered from the northwest and initially settled in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, and then over time spread out towards the eastern part of India. Now, what languages are we talking about here? These people are believed to have been members of the Indo-European language family, and specifically of a subset of this family called the Indo-Aryan languages. Today, these languages include the Hindustani languages like Hindi and Urdu, Bengali, Punjabi, Marathi, Gujarati, and others. These languages can be traced back to Sanskrit, and further back to an Indo-Aryan original language. One reason why this is controversial is because the sacred books of the Hindus were composed in Sanskrit, and this theory suggests either that the books could not have come into existence until after this migration occurred, or that they were composed outside of India. Some Hindus believe the books are much older than 2000 BCE. As for me, what I share with you is not based on a political or religious ideology I hold. I don't care whether Indo-Aryans migrated into South Asia at this time or at any other time. I have no personal stake in this. All I care about is what is indicated by the evidence. The theory of Indo-Aryan migration is based mostly on linguistic evidence, which is complex and difficult for non-specialists to understand. But basically, we're talking about the reconstruction of the family tree of Indo-European languages by using the evidence within the languages themselves. In order to provide corroboration, people have looked to other forms of evidence: archaeological, genetic, historical, etc. But these forms of evidence are far less firm. A few preliminaries to get out of the way before we get into the meat of this. There are some misunderstandings people have about this subject that I think need to be cleared up. One, despite what you may hear from some people, whether speakers of a certain language entered into the Indian subcontinent and stayed there has no bearing on whether one race is better than another, or one culture is better than another. Two, Indo-Aryan is the name for a group of languages, not for a race. Why is it called that? The prefix Indo indicates these languages are found largely in the Indian subcontinent, and the term Aryan suggests that these are languages spoken in Aryavarta, the land of the Arya, as referred to in ancient Indian texts. But the ancient word Arya does not mean the same thing as the modern linguistic term Indo-Aryan. Indo-Aryan is a subgroup of the larger Indo-Iranian language group, which in turn is part of the even larger Indo-European language family. It's a classification, in the same way that we classify animal species or minerals. I recognize that some people use the word Aryan as shorthand for Indo-Aryan, but I think this just causes confusion and should be avoided. The term Arya was used in South Asia as a word meaning noble, and in Iran as an ethnonym. The term was only ever used by Indo-European speakers in Iran and India. There is no evidence it was ever used by any other Indo-European group, so it is inappropriate to call all Indo-Europeans Aryans. 4. This theory does not posit that anyone brought the Vedas to the Indian subcontinent from somewhere else. To be sure, some think that maybe a few of the songs of the Rig Veda may have been composed in Afghanistan. I am not one of them, but the Vedas as a whole, all scholars agree, are the product of the Indian subcontinent. 5. Indo-Aryan languages likely have their origin to the northwest of India, but Sanskrit, the most famous of all Indo-Aryan languages, at least in its classical form, originated within the Indian subcontinent itself. Please note that if someone says that Indo-Aryan languages originated outside the subcontinent, this is not equivalent to saying Sanskrit originated outside the subcontinent. 6. I'm well aware that the Aryan invasion theory, which proposes that a race of light-skinned Aryan warriors invaded and conquered the Indian subcontinent en masse and destroyed the Harappan culture, the Indus Valley civilization, still enjoys some popularity in India among Dravidian nationalists, but it is no longer accepted in world scholarship. In the past, it was popular in archaeology to attribute cultural change to invasions and migrations across the board. And archaeologists have been seeking to find a good explanation for the decline of Harappan civilization. Now we recognize that invasions are only one way to explain cultural changes, and there is no evidence of anything Indo-Aryan on the ruins of the Harappan culture. If there was a settlement of these people, it would have occurred apart from the Harappans. The transformative period between 2000 and 1000 BCE was a period of integration and synthesis, not a period of imperial domination. 7. There are people who wish to call the theory of Indo-Aryan migration into India the Aryan invasion theory, as it serves their interests to equate the two. In this way, they can strawman the current theory by associating it with a more extreme and now debunked theory. I will always differentiate between the two. If you find anyone that does not, please beware, as it shows a level of dishonesty or ignorance. 8. It is a common belief among the uninformed that history is based on what past historians have written or said. This isn't true. History is based on evidence. This is why every theory that currently holds a consensus among scholars is periodically questioned and reassessed. So while it's true that Indo-logical studies are very much rooted in the colonial past, and theories of older times reflected a bias in favor of the superiority of Western cultures over Asian cultures, this is not sufficient cause to reject current views on the history of South Asia, because current views are based, as I said, on evidence. 9. The theory of Indo-Aryan migration does not assume that Europe is the mother culture of India, or that Europeans entered India and gave them their culture or their civilization, or superior customs. It assumes, rather, that the homeland of Indo-Europeans is outside of both Western Europe and India, and that both Western Europe and India have common origins. They're better described as linguistic siblings. So although there continues to be debate among scholars about exactly where the homeland of Indo-Europeans was, there is general agreement that neither Western Europe nor India was that homeland. So now we get to the Out of India theory, OIT, also known as Indigenous Aryanism, which posits that India was the homeland of Indo-European languages. Perhaps the first thing you should know about is that it's the creation of amateurs and is not taken seriously by scholars anywhere in the world. You will not find it propounded in the pages of peer-reviewed academic journals. It can be found primarily in the press, on the internet, and in popular books directed towards a general audience. The OIT is most popular in India among Hindu nationalists. Indian academic historians, archaeologists, and linguists do not accept OIT, though there are a few exceptions. OIT ideologues will say that this is because the academics are being controlled or influenced by the West, and because they're all just a bunch of Marxists. I've read rather a lot about the archaeology of India in the period in question, and what I've gathered from it is that archaeology really doesn't show any clear-cut evidence either for or against the theory of Indo-Aryan migration, or for or against indigenous Aryanism. It could go either way. There is, however, some circumstantial evidence that could be relevant. So, for example, the material evidence seems to suggest that horse breeding didn't begin in the region until after the proposed Indo-Aryan migration into India took place, or that the society reflected in the Rig Veda, the earliest Vedic Indo-Aryan text, does not appear to match the material evidence of a literate urban society we have found in the Harappan civilization. This has not stopped some people from asserting that archaeology not only contradicts the theory of Indo-Aryan migration, but it in fact supports OIT. One proponent of OIT, a Flemish author by the name of Conrad Elst, said this in a recent interview. Of course, OIT is a fringe theory, at least internationally, where the Aryan invasion theory is still the official paradigm. Notice how he mischaracterizes the theory of Indo-Aryan migration as the Aryan invasion theory. In India, though, OIT, has the support of most archaeologists, who fail to find a trace of this Aryan influx and instead find cultural continuity. This statement was done in an interview off the cuff, so maybe Elst didn't think it through, but to support a belief in an outward migration from India archaeologically, you would need to see evidence of this in the material record. You wouldn't merely need to find no trace of Aryan influx. In other words, simply showing there is no proof archaeologically of an Indo-Aryan migration into India, OIT is not suddenly shown to be correct. And of course there is cultural continuity in the archaeological record, because there always is, unless one culture completely eradicates another. Usually, however, a new group of people would only add to the already existing culture. And then yes, you would see cultural continuity as well as the new elements. He claims there are no new elements, giving no regard for changes in architecture, population shifts toward the east and south, the introduction of the horse, and the subsequent appearance of new gods, inscriptions in the new language, and the like. These things could have happened without a migration, of course, but to say that an influx of new peoples left no trace is simply false. It's just a matter of figuring out what counts as a trace. He says that most archaeologists in India support OIT. I'm not sure how Elst made this calculation. At least as far as the published papers go, I have been hard-pressed to find any that argue for OIT. I could find only one living archaeologist in India who supports it explicitly, Vasant Shinde, and only then really in interviews. Bibi Lal did before he died. I'm sure I've missed a few, but my impression is that most Indian archaeologists who work on this period do not support the out-of-India theory. So I decided to contact an Indian archaeologist, one who works on this period in particular, to see what I can find out about the situation. Her name is Disha Aluwalia, and she's a junior research fellow at the Indian Council of Historical Research. She specializes in the archaeology of the Harappan civilization in the very period we're looking at. Disha has worked as a field archaeologist at sites like Rakhigarhi, Binjore, and Senali, and is pursuing a PhD in archaeology from MS University, Baroda. She's also the founder of Confessions of an Archaeologist, a social media handle dedicated to furthering public understanding of archaeology. Let's see what she had to say about all of this. After that, we will come back and examine some specific archaeological arguments by OIT proponents. What are your particular interests in archaeology? What do you specialize in?
So I work in proto-historic period, which is basically the period of first urbanization. I have worked at a few Harappan settlements, the Indus Valley sites, and my time period, which I usually work on, starts from about 7,000 BCE, goes all the way to 1100 BCE. So that is a broader
very
time
early.
where I've worked, and I'm still working in that time frame. So that is where my interest lies.
Well, I can understand why. It's an exciting time, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting and exciting and
Well, then,
misunderstood.
you're the perfect person to talk to then about this. So I want to ask you some questions about things related to, Aryan invasion theory and all of that. But I guess I'll start out by asking, and if you could tell my audience this because I think they'd be interested. Uh, why is this issue, the issue of whether Indo-Aryans migrated into India, so politically divisive in India?
Yeah. I think it has to do with the whole idea of division that was implanted in our consciousness. That is, the northern Indians are Aryans and the southern Indians are Dravidians. Although, as per the texts and as per the tradition, the Aryan and Dravidian division doesn't exist. We do have, there was an established caste system, but there was nothing called the Aryan or Dravidian.
Would you say then that the hostility towards the theory of Indo-Aryan migration is because maybe nationalists in the South want to use it to divide India because oh we were here first, and
I think it all started with the nationalists in the north. And
oh
now
okay
South is retaliating back. I don't think it started in
ah
South. South's been a victim of a lot of the northern nationalism and northern prejudice for a really long period of time. And I think I should admit to it. So South is now retaliating back. And Southern India is basically trying to bring focus back to South. And I agree with it. We need to understand South the way we should understand Southern India. Its traditions are unique. We cannot compare it with North. And North have always been doing that for a really long period of time. So I think now the retaliation is sort of happening. The nationalism, the seed of it, I think, was laid in North, not South.
I
It
see.
sort of spread in all directions, to be
Yeah,
really
yeah,
honest,
yeah.
at one point of time. Yeah,
But a lot of it has to do with how long we've been here, right? This is the main question everyone's
yeah,
interested in. Um, Now, how do you navigate this as an archaeologist without offending people? Like you want to be able to present the facts, right?
yeah.
How do you do it and not have people attack you?
So I think there's a reason why culture has taken shape, and the reason lies in the landscape. Archaeologists are trained in India in such a way that we look at it, we look at archaeological wealth in tune with the landscape and our rivers, and sort of go back in time and try and understand how the culture has been shaped. And that's what I actually do. So I usually don't engage in controversial topics. Like, but I know the reasoning why these topics have
Well, I'm going
become
to make
controversial.
you a little bit today.
That's all right.
Okay. Um, but let's get into the meat of it here. First
Yeah.
thing I want to ask about this whole idea of migration is, do you think that Indo-Aryan language can be identified with an actual material archaeological culture? Can we think of Indo-Aryan speakers as an ethnic group that have their own pottery styles or types of buildings, or can that not be done?
Cannot be done. Cannot
Okay.
be done because Indo-Aryan languages took a really long time to sort of develop and evolve individually. Like Hindi and Punjabi, also my mother tongue, they both are part of the Indo-Aryan language group, right? But they took a lot of time to evolve, and the languages are, of course, influenced. They're quite similar. Like in Punjabi, there are a lot of words which are very similar to Persian. And if I communicate with somebody in Afghanistan, in Balochistan region of Pakistan, or even in Persian, somebody who speaks Persian language can understand few words, right? I can understand it because that's how the adaptation has happened, how the evolution has happened. But when we're talking about the material culture, no, you cannot basically find that. You cannot pinpoint to Indo-Aryan group, the language group, in the material culture. In material culture, you see a very different story. Of course, migration is inevitable. And look at India, where it is placed strategically in southern Asian context. Immigration is inevitable. That's the reason why we've had a long history of migration, starting right from prehistoric times, right? You have Paleolithic sites being dated to 1.5 million now. So we have a long history of migration, and that cannot be denied by any
Does that show up in
archaeologists.
archaeology? Can you trace the movement of, you can trace the movement of archaeological cultures, right? Like if you see a
Yeah.
pottery style move from one place to another, maybe?
For a long period of time, people have been trying to see the west to east migration in pottery or any other cultural material. Unfortunately, apart from few instances, apart from the Harappan civilization, in other cultures, you don't see that. You do see the Kushans moving in from the Central Asia, the Kushanas, other early historic Indo-Greeks coming in. So the pottery style sort of changes. Kushans had their own pottery style. So in the early historic context, you do see it, but there is also east to west migration, which has hardly been anybody talk about. So the migration is happening all the time,
Yeah.
but
And we
you
can't
cannot,
identify it
but
with
you
a
don't have
specific language. Yeah.
so the yeah so the also that, and also the percentage of migrated pottery or migrated material is less than the regional. You need to understand there is element which certain material culture which defines migration, which denotes to a migration, but the percentage is very less in the entire assemblage. So you need to understand, you need to evaluate that as well.
Mhm.
Like, for instance, let me give you an example of the Harappan civilization. The Harappans was spread over a very large area, right? They were on the in bank of Indus, they were on the banks of Ghaggar Hakra, the Saraswati river system. We do see a lot of Indus elements even in Kashmir. We do see a lot of Indus elements in Punjab, Haryana. But percentage is again very limited. You have the regional imprints are so strong, and that has been the story of the early ancient settlements all throughout the time frame that we see. So
Mhm.
migration is inevitable, you cannot argue it, but I will not agree to the fact that historians claim that a large group of people migrated about 1500 BCE, and they are the ones who changed the cultural scenario, and their movement led to the emergence of culture. I will not agree to that, because
Mhm.
that's just one side of the story. I think that archaeologically speaking, um, that is not the truth. That is not the reason. Migration is inevitable, but you can't say that at one particular time period, a group of people migrated to the subcontinent and they are the ones who led to an emergence of a new culture. That is not
As
true.
I understand it, that idea is already becoming outdated, right?
But it's in India. It's strongly been put forth by a certain group
Uh,
of
uh-huh.
people. The intellectual. It's been put forth. It's still been.
That's still, but
The invasion is out of the question. But this whole Aryan migration actually is dependent on that.
mhm.
And Western scholars are moving forward. They are like a lot of our collaborators. We now are trying to see the other side of the story, which we are not. We've like largely ignored for over 7-8 decades. But in India, this is still remained a
Interesting.
problem. Yeah.
Uh-huh. I've got the an archaeology book, The Archaeology of South Asia, by I forget the archaeologist's names now. Um,
Yeah.
but I don't know if you're familiar with a huge tome. I'm getting my info, but they are very cautious about making any big conclusions about a
Yeah.
mass migration or anything like that.
Yeah. That because I don't know who's written the book. I think is it the latest edition? Is
Let
it
me,
by Cunningham and
let me,
Young?
I'll pull it out here. Um,
Uh,
Robin Cunningham and Ruth Young.
Yeah, so I work with Robin Cunningham, and this is a very good book. I know Professor Cunningham personally, and he will not make an assumption, because to be honest, in archaeology, and he's worked in India, he's worked in Pakistan, he's worked in Nepal, Sri Lanka. Because we as archaeologists don't see that. We don't see a definitive imprint in material culture. So it's very difficult for us archaeologists to say anything with
Right.
100%.
Right. So
uh,
you're
you
not
know
you're basically saying archaeology cannot really provide an answer for this, a definitive answer for this.
no, it
Yeah.
cannot.
Yeah.
um and
And the same thing
and
with
I
Dravidians as well. They don't, would you consider them to have their own archaeological culture, or just a diverse array of cultures that You can't
A
really.
diversity of cultures for sure. I'm working on a manuscript at the moment where I'm trying to sort of piece together the diversity in archaeological culture, north, south, east, and west, and they have their own identity. In southern Indian contexts, but they're not divided. There is a lot of collaboration is also happening, maybe not from the Indus straight to Tamil Nadu, but then in between, because the distance is quite large, from Indus to all the way to Tamil Nadu. But then a lot of trade is happening with the Deccan, a lot of trade is happening with Western India, a lot of trade is happening with Central India. We often forget that there are other states in between,
Mm-hmm.
which are also crucial. We often forget that. So yes, they have a regional imprints of their own individual cultures and archaeological cultures, which are very, very important.
Okay. Um, so some people I've noticed do try, especially with the Harappan culture, they try to associate some of the religious practices with
Yeah,
Vedic practices. So, well, like
yeah.
Sanskrit is a language, right? And it's associated with the Vedas, and the Vedas refer to specific religious practices, customs. So, wouldn't it be reasonable to suppose that those practices would show up in the archaeological record?
I think the idea. Today, my column on the Ramayana was published, and what I wanted to say in that column was not to create any controversy. What I wanted to say that archaeologically, it's very difficult to validate a belief system, a validate belief. It's if somebody says I'm going to find the imprints of Lord Krishna at a site, or I'm going to find I'm going to do archaeology of Krishna, I'm going to just laugh, because that's not archaeology. Cannot do that. That's not the purpose of archaeology. What archaeology can do, there's a difference between the words. It's a play of words, right? Archaeology of the Ramayana sites, the whole sentence, the meaning is different. Archaeology of the Ramayana sites, archaeology of Ramayana, there is a difference between these two titles, right? And the idea initially, when the whole conversation around the Rig Veda and finding its remnants in manifestation in archaeological remains started, the idea was to find a proto-Vedic period, because India has a long continuity as well. We have a long continuity, history of continuity of traditions. For instance, like this is how we greet people, and we join our hands, and this is how we usually greet. There are few sculptures in Harappan context which have had, the human figurines with folded hands. So this is one continuity which invariably we sort of passing on to the next generation, right? So there are certain elements which I've continued, and they are not necessarily religious in nature. They could be just traditions and practices, the day-to-day practices which have sort of passed down over thousands of years. The idea was to find that link, find the proto-Vedic practices which can bridge the gap between the two,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
The idea was not to say the Harappans and the Rigvedic people were the two sides of the same coin. The idea was not that, but it became that. It became that. So it's very difficult to say the Harappans are the Vedic people. There is a very good argument to that, but we don't have archaeological proof to definitely say it.
I say, yeah.
It does have few elements which perhaps in the later period, during the Vedic period, because see, Vedas were oral texts. They were written very late. And Sanskrit itself is a very late language. It comes very late in antiquity. And the time period where we're talking about, there are no written records but the seals and sealings of Harappan civilization. There are absolute no written records. So you see there is a huge gap in literary records. To find that, to bridge that, it's very, very difficult.
Yeah. So you can say, like, well, yes, certain practices, they belong to this place, but to be able to
Yeah,
say, well, these are these people, they spoke this language,
yeah.
archaeology can't say that, right?
You can't say that, yeah.
The common term that everyone uses for this culture is the Indus Valley civilization. And then you hear people saying, especially Indians, they don't like that, because the Indus is in Pakistan, so it's the Indus-Sarasvati civilization. But I noticed that you're a big proponent of the Harappan culture, which is, of course, Harappa is the type site.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about why you chose that term?
Why we
Why do you think that's preferable?
I think archaeologically, and I think I've written also about it. And I was, when one night I just read one of the Sanskrit scholars. He's written an opinion piece in one of the newspapers in India, and he said that the Harappan term is misleading and it's not Indian and it should not be used. The term should be used Vedic civilization. You know, the question that you just asked me of the Vedas. So he said that, and the question, I don't remember the exact because it was sort of last December, I think, when I've written on this, and I was like, I'm going to write on this because this person is not an archaeologist. He's never worked at a site. He has no idea how an archaeological material is procured, and then what's the process that we go through, and before the interpretation, there's a whole lot of things that as an archaeologist we do. So he has no right to tell us whether Harappan is the appropriate term or not. So I have written back and I've said that you need to learn to hold a trowel to be able to understand why Harappan civilization is not misleading. Now, the story goes back to 1920s, the time when John Marshall and his team, which included young Indian archaeologists, they started working at Harappa, which was the first site not identified, it was identified before that, but was excavated. And this was the first site which gave clue to an unknown civilization at that point of time. And when 1924, 100 years ago, exact 100 years ago, when John Marshall published that material and announced to the world about the discovery, it was only limited to Indus because he had only explored the Indus region. You have sites like Mohenjo-daro which were being excavated. You have Ambri. So the sites were only along the bank of River Indus. So the term he came up with was appropriate because the sites were only on Indus, which was Indus Valley civilization, because most of the cultures which were not known, their identity was not known, were either named after potsherds, a marker pottery, or named after an area or a valley. So River Valley seems fit for them. And Indus Valley civilization in 1920s, 30s, 40s was an apt term to be used. The scenario changed when post-1947, when Indian archaeologists started to explore Indian region along the bank of the Saraswati River system, which is Ghaggar Hakra, Pakistan, the area of Cholistan, the Indian states which are bordering Pakistan today, and they have started finding similar remains. They excavated the sites, and they found that the settlement, they go parallel. So you have Harappa, which goes back to 5,000, 6,000 BCE. We also have, in the newly formed India, the similar cultural sequence, similar material, everything is similar. So therefore, the term Indus Valley does not stand chance, because you have sites in Gujarat as well. So you have sites in the coastal region of India and also in Pakistan. So the spread of the civilization, which was only limited to Indus at one point of time, has expanded. So naturally, the term Indus Valley does not make sense. So the Indian archaeologists, they agree to the more unbiased sort of a term, which is much more in sync with the archaeological contention of naming a culture after the type site, instead of having a political or regional, because India and Pakistan divided, the wound was not healed. I don't think it's even today healed, and mass migration has happened. So people were like, in Pakistan, they wanted to have their own national identity. India, they wanted to have national identity. In all of this, Indian archaeologists, especially A. Ghosh and others, said that Harappan civilization is the best term to use. And there is this tussle between the West and Western scholars and the South Asian scholars as well regarding the term. And I feel the Harappan civilization is the best term to explain because it's not limited to India, it's not limited to Pakistan. The civilization is not limited to any one particular river, but is spread across multiple rivers and also is spread in the coastal regions of both Pakistan and India. So the Indus Valley civilization does not make sense. Now, coming to the other terms, so you have the left, you have the black and white. So, now coming to the opposing term given by the a lot of Indian folks, which is the Indus Saraswati civilization. Now, this comes from again the point of view that Saraswati was a mythical river, a river which is mentioned in Rig Veda but has dried. So there was whole lot of research done by archaeologists, geologists, scientists to find the traces of the river which was once lost, and that is the river Saraswati, right? So now we know where Saraswati was. It's been established everywhere. So they want to showcase their prominence now here with the terms like Indus Saraswati, clubbing the two river systems. This term is also incorrect because the settlement is not again limited to only rivers. It's in the desert, it's in the coastal regions, it's majority of sites are also in Gujarat. So again, that term is also not correct. So the best way to keep these controversies away from research and study and academia is to use Harappan civilization.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I've been using IVC for a long time, but I'm going to make an effort now to
Yeah,
say Harappan.
interestingly, a lot of scholars, what they do when they're publishing in Western journals, they title their papers as, blank Indus Valley site excavated and all of that. In abstract, they switch to Harappan civilization. So the title is always IVC, but somewhere the Harappan, the term sort of, pops up. So it's quite, we are transitioning, I think, slowly.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we transition in the right direction.
Now, as we were talking about, some people insist that the Harappan culture was identical to Vedic culture and that the people spoke Sanskrit there. And you already have told me that, we can't really make that draw that conclusion from archaeology. But a famous archaeologist, Basant Shinde, I don't know if I'm saying that right, he released a press statement in September of 2019 after a genetic study came out. And he said to the press, this research also establishes the fact that the Vedic culture was developed by the indigenous people of South Asia. Our premise that the Harappans were the Vedic people thus has received strong corroborative scientific evidence based on ancient DNA studies. Now, I did a video already on this where I show that the DNA study does not draw that conclusion. But here's a prominent archaeologist who says this. It suggests also that he has already been saying that they're the same. Do you think he's reading too much into the evidence?
I think so, yes. With all due respect, I think Professor Shinde, he is aware of the fact that he's reading too much into it. We see DNA study is separate. What it tells you with one sample is that the person whose sample has been tested, that particular person belongs to the Iranian hunter-gatherers as opposed to the Iranian farming or steppe farming or migrant. So again, this Aryan migration does not belong to the person. Ancestry does not fits with the steppe or Iranian farmers, but it goes way back in antiquity and is sort of find its connect to the hunter-gatherers who've migrated
And it was from a
during
time
the
before the supposed migration anyway.
yeah, so that is out of Africa. It's when the Homo sapien migration has taken place, and during that period of time. So it sort of shows you that from there on, that particular individual's ancestry is not diluted, remain the same from the Homo sapien migration all the way till the Harappan civilization. But that is just one sample. It is an
Do you
important.
think he said this to make the press happy, or is he convinced that he's right about this?
I am yet to speak to him about this. I would really love to ask him what exactly he means because in I've worked on the same site, Rakhigarhi. I worked for 2 years after, recently, like last 2 seasons, I was at Rakigiri excavated the site along with Dr. Manjul, who was heading the excavation. I assisted him. Uh, so, we know for a fact that to be able to attest, I've mentioned this, to link it to Vedas, we have to have different parameters archaeologically. We need to have material cultures which definitively tells us about, or any evidence such as the fire altar. There's so many things which can connect to Vedas. They're missing, but need to find different parameters. But DNA is a very different story. And I think the paper which was published on DNA is very clear. It was
Yeah.
a team of reputed scientists who worked on it. I think David Reich is also, Professor David is also, I think, part of the team. A lot of our scientists have worked on that particular DNA analysis, and that is an important DNA analysis. But I feel that is different than the Vedic conversation. There are two different conversations. I think he just clubbed the two research questions. Archaeologically, they are very separate, two different research questions that we cannot merge.
Now, there's another respected archaeologist, B.B. Lal, who has been, well, he's gone now, but he was accused of being sort of an ideologue in his later years and ruining his great reputation. What is your take on that?
See, Professor, so B.V. Lal, he was Mortimer Wheeler's student. Mortimer Wheeler was the last British archaeologist to take over as Director General before India and Pakistan were partitioned. And B.B. Lal was his student. And if you read B.B. Lal's work, like his early work, his works, he has written on prehistory, he's written on, that was a period in 1950s, 60s where dating is just was evolving. The carbon dating was evolving. So he's written on the issues of chronology in India. He's written on critical issues of India. He's excavated important settlements. And when he was excavating sites which are linked to the epics, like the Mahabharata or the Ramayana sites, he was very honest with this point of view. Like I remember when he's written on the Mahabharata, he said that the finding is circumstantial, it's geographical exploration, and if tomorrow you find a different evidence which goes with the theory better than my evidence, I will step down. So he was not that, he was humble. He was able to, he's corrected himself a lot with the whole Aryan issue, the whole Aryan invasion and all of that. He corrected himself. I think it was only when the 1992 event has happened, which is linked to the Ramayana, and when the politicization of archaeology began in India, that is where his work sort of took a shift. His reputation sort of was changed in public eye. But as a student of archaeology, I see the pre-1992 Lal, and I think that work is monumental. Able to find different cultures, name them differently, and he was very open in his writing. He said that he gave opportunities to others. He wanted others to work on these research topic. I don't know what went through and what happened later time period, but for me, I consider the Lal, the early writings and his work much. I give it much more importance than the latter. Yeah.
From what I understand, archaeologists generally date the beginning of the mature Harappan period. This is when the civilization urbanized, became, this is the heyday, to around 2600 BCE. But carbon dating that was done by Anindya Sarkar at the site of Birana has suggested pushing the date back to around 3000 BCE. Do you think an earlier dating is warranted, or are we still thinking 2600 is about right?
See, the mature Harappan, the consensus and the average dates from almost all the sites is 26 to 2500, somewhere around that. And that has sort of remained the same. The date of 3000 at Birana, at various other sites, they signifies a transition phase which could be there from early to mature. And we at Rakhigadi and various other sites that I have excavated, the Indus Valley, the Harappan sites, I have also found a strata which is about 3,000, 3,200, where you have the early material as well, but you also start finding the changes within that material complex. That is, a lot of mature Harappan elements starts to appear. So
Oh,
a pre-mature Harappan phase sort of starts around to 3000 BCE. So 2600 is a largely accepted date, and I don't think we need to change that.
okay.
Um, yeah.
All right, now let's go to the end of the final years of the Harappan civilization, and then the next few centuries that follow, where there are not big cities anymore. So there's kind of a transition. So I'm very interested in this period. What is happening as the Harappan civilization is in decline and ending, and other things are taking its place? Can you just tell us a little bit about, give us an overview of that period?
So when there are various settlements like Dholavira, where the change takes place, which means that the intensity of trade decreases. The cities are not well maintained, because Harappans had a particular type of architecture. Their pattern, the settlement pattern was quite uniform. So at one point, they stopped maintaining their cities. And, Harappans are known for the sanitation and the drainage system. That also sort of starts to collapse. There is a change that has happened at sites like Dholavira, even at Harappa. And there the finer things, the finer elements of Harappan civilization disappears. For instance, in the seal, the animals disappear. The figurines that they disappear from the seal. You only have the letters, and that's it. The antiquities are not as fine. The trade is sort of declining, so you see the intensity of workshops also sort of decreases, and the manufacturing, the intensity of production also decreases in this time period. So this is one region. But when you go towards the region where the region of the Great Thar Desert, or on the banks of Ghaggar, Hakra, or Saraswati, and in one area, the settlements are deserted even before the late Harappan starts.
Hmm.
That is because of the temperature and the climatic changes, and the river Saraswati is now become a perennial or monsoon-fed river. So sides on that, on the bank of Saraswati, especially the last end, the lower, part of Saraswati, where there are, where on one side you have the Cholistan and the desert, there the change is happening very differently. But then you have sites where the river is perennial, but then you have other water sources. The migration is sort of happening slowly towards the east, and from the Indus, the migration is also happening, in different regions. Um, in the eastern side, if I talk about the scenario, there the culture shifts and it merges with the succeeding cultures, just the way I was explaining in terms of the mature and the premature and mature Harappan. So the merging and overlap with succeeding cultures happens in various regions. Slowly, the Harappan elements disappear, and then it sort of disappears and merges with the culture which sort of succeeds the Harappan culture. So
Hmm.
that is a very slow process at various regions that you see. It's
Yeah.
not a it's not an overall occurrence. It's only happening in one region of Harappan civilization.
I see. But I mean,
Yeah.
city building uh,
Yeah, it
changes, or
collapsed.
either
Yeah,
ends or
it
changes.
changes.
Yeah.
Yeah. They started having wattle and daub structures instead of, baked brick or brick walled houses. Now they have also wattle and daub structures, simple huts, and humble architecture as compared to the early periods.
So what I'm trying to understand more is that, like one side will say, uh, it's total continuity, nothing changes, it's all the same, it's all Indian civilization, it just continues, and they emphasize the continuity. Others will say, no, something ends and something else begins. There's a total break. I'm sure the truth is somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah, it is in the middle. It's exactly in the middle. It's not, there's no total break. As I've mentioned, there is a change that happens in an area, in particular area of the Harappan civilization, especially in the northern Indian context. The change happens there. For instance, the late Harappan settlements overlap with the succeeding painted grey ware culture in some region, and then PGW takes over for a few hundred years, and then you have the early historic, the second urbanization, which sets in. So you don't see a gap at all in chronology now. There is no gap in chronology, and the regions where there was no Harappan civilization, where they were indigenous cultures, a contemporary culture, there the continuity exists all throughout. Like you have sites like Maski, Brahmagiri, where there is continuity all throughout. There is absolutely no break. The break was only in the northern, that part of Harappan civilization, only one region of Harappan civilization. That's where the break was, which was termed as a dark age. But that is sort of been filled with new evidence now.
But I mean, but there's no more cities of the Harappan style
No,
after a certain point, right?
no, no, no,
Would
no.
you
Yeah,
Oh, would you liken this to like when the Roman Empire fell and Europe went into a different it's continuity, but also the empire's gone.
yeah.
I don't mean to say that Harappan culture was an empire, I don't know, but what I'm saying is in the archaeological record, it sort of goes there's I wouldn't say there's a fall in technology necessarily, but the way of living changes, right?
Yeah, the way of living, it actually changed. See, the Harappan, the civilization, the essence of the civilization was in the trade relations with the Western civilization. Harappans were largely traders, but not within the Harappan civilization. They were also agrarians who was residing, right? They were pastoralists as well. So for agrarian and pastoralists, it was very easy to change. It's like, they wear new clothes. You adorn new clothes, new identity, but you continue that practice. So if you look at the continuity of the practice, such as the agrarian and pastoralism and all of that, that has continued for thousands of years in
Hmm.
India. The
Hmm.
the whole only thing which changed or sort of disappeared was the Harappan trade which was supported by Harappan manufacturing.
And
That's the
Harappan
only thing.
architecture, right?
Harappan architecture, yeah.
And writing.
Yeah, Harappan architecture was also during the mature Harappan period was also because of its economic boom, the
Hmm.
Harappan economic boom,
Hmm.
right? So it went back to its sort of you. There's something called regionalization, integration, and localization era, which Jim Sheffer and others have propounded very early on. Which these are three stages of Harappan civilization. So the first, the early Harappan is the the period of regionalization, where there are a lot of regional characteristics starts to appear in material culture. Then you have the integration, where the entire civilization is now under one, following the similar pattern of architecture. They're following standardized weight. They're following standardized brick size and all of that. And
Hmm.
then comes the localization phase, where the integration of certain characters break, and the cultures go back to the local state.
Hmm.
So the changes are happening in this in a very complex way, but you don't see a gap at all.
Okay. A gap in the sense of like a lack of people or something like
Yeah,
the people
yeah,
continue.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So there was no, yeah, exactly.
Hmm. Okay. All right, great. That sheds a lot of light on this. I've already taken more of your time than I wanted to. We could go on and on, I'm sure. But I appreciate you taking the time today to speak with me about this.
The impression I get is that archaeologists in India are far more reserved in their conclusions about what the material evidence suggests about an Indo-Aryan migration than Konrad Elst has said. But now let's take a look at some of the archaeological evidence that has been used to support OIT to see if there's anything to it. I will start with the most ridiculous pieces of evidence first and work my way up to the stronger stuff.
I have to include the silly arguments because it's all over the internet. The Kalpa Vigraha. As evidence for the great age of Indian civilization, and specifically that Hinduism existed in India long before any supposed Indo-Aryan migration, people will sometimes point to this amazing artifact, the Kalpa Vigraha. It's an idol of Shiva, allegedly dating back over 28,000 years. Mind you, if an idol of Shiva that old has ever been found or will ever be found, I'm happy to accept it. The name Shiva is Indo-Aryan, but historians are of the opinion that Shiva is a god with pre-Vedic roots and may have been called other names earlier on. So finding a Shiva wouldn't really have any bearing on the question of Indo-Aryan migration unless the name Shiva actually appeared on it. But all that is moot because this story about the Kalpa Vigraha is a hoax and has nothing to do with real archaeology. The tale of the idol first appeared in a 2015 article on bookfact.com titled Kalpa Vigraha, Oldest Hindu Idol of Lord Shiva, 26,450 BC. While making bold assertions about the idol's age, the article lacked any substantial evidence. Despite this, the story grew in popularity as various groups and individuals shared it widely on social media. As interest in the story increased and people asked for proof, such as the archaeological report or the published carbon dates, those sharing the myth engaged in further deceptive tactics. On July 7th, 2020, a Twitter account was created impersonating the respected archaeologist K.K. Mohammed, former regional director north of the Archaeological Survey of India. This fake account posted about the Kalpa Vigraha idol, repeating the same unproven information initially shared on bookfact.com. The post's credibility rose when it was retweeted by a prominent political figure. However, 4 days after the post appeared, the real K.K. Mohammed debunked these claims on Facebook, explaining that he does not use Twitter and that the account posting these claims was fake. He cautioned the public against trusting unreliable information spread by such sources. The foundation of this myth rests on a supposed radiocarbon dating analysis from the University of California Radiation Laboratory, allegedly dating the idol to 26,450 BC. In reality, no credible institution, including this laboratory, has confirmed the idol's age. Radiocarbon dating for such ancient artifacts is an intricate process that demands rigorous peer-reviewed research, which is entirely absent in the case of Kalpa Vigraha. The claim about the 28,000-year-old Shiva idol illustrates how misinformation can easily spread on social media by exploiting appeals to authority, emotional resonance, and viral sharing. This example highlights the importance of critical thinking, scrutinizing sources, and staying skeptical of extraordinary claims without credible evidence. Gulf of Combat finds. Let's look at some archaeological evidence that electrical engineer and OIT proponent Raj Vedam has put forward. His content doesn't include a lot about archaeology, but what he does say about archaeology is often misinformed. Here's his worst piece of evidence.
This is from a paper in Episodes in March 2003 from the National Institute of Ocean Technology in Chennai, India. So they took a ship off the west coast of India in Dwarka and equipped it with sonar and decided to map the ocean floor with sonar. So they found a 9-kilometer long feature 40 meters below the sea level, which they expect is the remnants of a city wall or a fortification and those kinds of things. What is more exciting is they dredged up a piece of wood which they were able to send it to the National Geophysical Research Institute in Hyderabad, as well as the Institute of Earth Science in Hanover, Germany. And they came back with a carbon dating of 8,500 years to 9,300 years before present as the date of this artifact, showing very great antiquity for this artifact at least.
I did a whole video on this supposed claim about ruins of Dwarka in the Gulf of Combat, and as you might expect, it's complete bunk. Remains from old Dwarka have been found near the modern city of Dwarka, not here. I'll leave a link to the full video below.
Method of worship is common across the entire region, matching with Hindus. There is a respect to all the animals, there is respect to the nature, respect to fire, respect to five elements, bhumi, rapu, nano, vayu, khamano, buddhi, revacha. All the earth, water, air, fire, and ether. Ether means space, like the where your movement is happening, and the wind is the place. We every culture respecting them, but the most important thing is Sumeru civilization is Indra. Now, the Greek accounts of what happened when, where, the way they have written, these all histories are written guided by the Vatican's conquest of the Africa, of the Middle East, and even India. Like, and Alex Cunningham, I recently heard that Alex Cunningham was just there to make money, and he was just a became a archaeologist by chance to find things for the British Empire. To find is like said, no, is a specialized force to find out what we lost, left looting. That is Alex Cunningham, and unfortunately, ASI of India is still considers him as a head. Cannot be removed because that's the right thing to say. But after independence, they should remove all the previous persons and put someone who loves the culture, who understands the culture.
Another approach taken by some OIT proponents is to compare ancient art found in India and ancient art found in Sumer or in Egypt, and try to use the similarities to argue that Sumer and Egypt got their ideas from India. We've seen this kind of reasoning elsewhere among alternative history enthusiasts, whether Atlantis proponents or ancient astronaut theorists. It's just pareidolia, noticing that this thing looks like another thing, and then trying to use this to argue for a link. But in archaeology, to establish a real connection between two cultures, dozens of factors need to be taken into consideration, including proximity, historical context, trade networks, linguistic evidence, genetic evidence, and on and on. Invariably, these simplistic kinds of arguments use only similar appearance, and that's it. I discuss the fallacy of this approach in more detail in my video, When Fake Archaeology Uses Fake Science. So far, none of this supposed archaeological evidence has come from archaeologists. Let's move up and see what actual archaeology OIT proponents have used.
In recent times, we have been told about the story of Kiradi. Kiradi has got an exciting story behind it. The archaeologist had wanted to dig in Madurai. However, Madurai is like any other Indian city, settled, a very expensive land, no place to obtain land for archaeology and so on. So he used his intuition and said that in ancient Madurai, if the supply chains coming in, where were the highways? And where is 1 day's worth journey from outside of Madurai? That's where a camp might have been. Well, he went to Kiradi and he said that's where it might have been, and he struck gold over there because he found an urban settlement right there in Kiradi. Outstanding methods used by this archaeologist, and they found several artifacts over there. However, the real story is not there. The real story is in this news item that came out saying that they excavated up to 4.5 meters depth at Kiradi. However, they sent samples from 2-meter depth to Florida, USA for carbon dating, and they came back with a date of around 300 BCE. Everybody was happy. They're happy because it fits into the common narrative beautifully and nobody questions. However, I scratched my head and said, what on earth is this? ASI reported 4.5 meters depth of excavation. If you think the top layer is 2017, then the 2 meters down by their own carbon dating is 2200 years. Therefore, every meter in depth should correspond to 1100 years by a linear scaling, which means 4.5 meters should correspond to approximately 5000 years before present. That is 3000 BCE. So why would ASI only report the middle layer result? Why would they not say we found a range of artifacts from the bottommost layer to 3000 BCE to around 500 BC? That would have been a much more honest representation of what was found. Well, it's not very surprising to think what's going on because you see in October 2017, Tamil Nadu government took over the Kiradi excavations. And also the archaeologists involved in Kiradi project was transferred out of there. So there is clearly an attempt to control the narrative coming out of Kiradi. If people were to come out saying that Kiradi is 3000 years old, 3000 BCE, then they are in an uncomfortable situation of trying to explain what are we teaching our school children? Why are our school children still learning that 500 BC is when Dravidians appeared in the record and Vedic structure was imposed on them? So any urban settlement in south is only 300 BC and older. They have to explain that. I believe they've taken the easy way out. I honestly hope that I'm mistaken.
The problem here is that Vidam doesn't know how stratigraphy works. He assumes archaeological layers are uniform, supposing that if the first layer is 10 centimeters, all the other layers in the 4.5 meter deposit will be 10 centimeters too, and so he will conveniently divide them and calculate the dates accordingly. He suggests that if the date from 2 meters depth is 300 BCE, the lowest level must be 3000 BCE. This is not how archaeologists calculate dates. Stratigraphy is a relative dating method, not an absolute dating method. See my video on archaeological dating methods for more info. Subhash Kak, an Indian-American computer scientist, is also a big proponent of OIT. He wrote a book called In Search of the Cradle of Civilization, along with David Frawley, remember him, and George Fauerstein, both non-Indian Hindu converts and spiritual teachers. The book is largely concerned with archaeoastronomy, but it brings in archaeology too.
So some are plausible events, but what happened to the people of Indus Valley civilization? So what were they moved with the Vedic civilization, or is this the continuation of Vedic civilization? It was earlier Indus Valley, then they moved to Vedic.
They, according to Professor Bibila, they are the same people. You find in Rajasthan or Sindh, you have pictures or images of women wearing these bangles of different kinds.
Correct.
From the Harappan period, right? And you find that women are still wearing the same bangles. I think
Right.
these are the key things. What is continuous is in art, is in the way we live. And
Right.
that has not changed.
Right.
That's not changed over 5,000 years. So it's the same people.
In an effort to show continuity between the culture of the Harappan civilization and culture in India today, it's common for people to point to images from Harappan art and say, see, it's the same as us. Therefore, we come from them. So, for example, Kak points to the bangles worn here on the figurine and compares them to bangles worn today. One thing that certain people don't seem to understand, and I can't emphasize this enough, is that the theory of Indo-Aryan migration does not deny cultural continuity with the Harappan civilization. Modern Indian and Pakistani culture have certainly inherited elements from the Harappan culture. No one denies this. They have inherited cultural elements from other sources, too. This makes modern culture all the more richer. Why insist on it being monolithic? It can only come from one place? Every culture in the world is composite, drawing on many interesting sources. Why would Indian culture be any different?
So I think India was more populated than just the estimates that have been made, looking at the towns and cities of the Harappan era. And even if you look only at that, India was the most densely populated region of the ancient world.
Yeah.
And it still is, right? It is the most densely, and of course Eastern China now. So it was the most densely populated, and the place where the earlier theory that maybe they came from Central Asia, the Central Asian plains cannot support a large population. That's steppes. Those are grasslands, and
Right.
even now the population is low. So there could not have been an excess population there, which would move to somewhere which was empty. See,
Right.
Europeans moved to the Americas because the American population was much smaller at that time, right? Because they were living in the grasslands in Canada or in North America. So the grasslands support very small population because people are mobile, right? And population increases when people become settled, when they lived in villages and towns, as the Vedic civilization was all about living in villages and towns. They were
Right.
settled people, and that's why the population was large.
Strangely, he argues that the population of India was too large for any immigrants to fit in. But he bases his argument on the claim the population of India was larger than what archaeologists say it was. Word to the wise, if you're going to make an argument, base it on generally accepted facts.
All other art, bangles, other stuff, the yogi, the famous Pashupati seal from Mohenjo-daro, everything is continuing.
Right.
There is continuation that can be seen in so many different ways, architecturally, archaeologically, and that means it's the same.
There are scholars in the past who have linked several Harappan artifacts, such as conical objects, specific seals, and figurines, to Shiva, and have proposed that they represent an early form of Shiva worship. But this idea has not been generally accepted among archaeologists and historians, not because they are anti-Hindu, but because the connection with Shiva is not as clear-cut as some would have you believe. The first key item is Mohenjo-daro seal number 420, which depicts a figure surrounded by animals and seated in a pose some believe to be yogic. Previously proposed as a proto-Shiva representation, this figure has a three-faced appearance, an erect phallus, debatably, and a headdress suggesting Shiva's later trident. This seal has been seen as embodying Shiva's attributes, like his role as Pashupati, or Lord of the Animals. But it has been observed that the figure's headdress, posture, and facial characteristics are similar to iconography that was common across other ancient cultures, including Mesopotamia, and could very well indicate a non-specific divinity symbolizing fertility. An identification as a precursor to Shiva is therefore open to question. Some also have pointed to what appear to be linga stones found at Harappan sites, and these have been linked to Shiva's lingam. But these stones, often found in locations such as drains or streets rather than enshrined spaces, were likely not religious objects. Furthermore, early Shiva lingas from the historical Vedic regions consist of more realistic and anatomically explicit representations of a phallus, suggesting a different origin from the abstract Indus stones. These early lingas are geographically limited to areas associated with Vedic traditions, while no lingas are found in regions north and west of the Vedic heartland, where the center of Harappan culture was. So while the Harappan artifacts indicate a rich religious and symbolic life, they do not provide conclusive evidence for the presence of Shiva worship. Instead, these objects should be seen as part of a broader set of religious symbols prevalent in ancient civilizations. The links are largely interpretive projections rather than firmly grounded in the archaeological record. But whether we're talking about Shiva or any other cultural elements from the Harappan civilizations that appear to coincide with later Hindu traditions, this has no bearing whatsoever on whether an Indo-Aryan migration happened or did not happen, because there's no doubt that some cultural continuity exists. Hindu culture undoubtedly drew not only from Indo-Aryan culture, but also Harappan culture and other indigenous cultures of the Indian subcontinent. If someone wants to argue that Harappan culture was identical to Vedic culture, this will require a lot more than just finding some similarities. Migration of art motifs. A Russian historian and independent researcher by the name of Alexander Andreevich Semenenko has written several articles trying to establish the out of India theory. Semenenko likes to trace the migration of people by following the trail of art motifs. This is not a method generally accepted among archaeologists anymore for reconstructing the movement of people. I talk about this a bit in my video about the politicization of ancient history, and this is because art, on its own, cannot reliably be linked to specific groups of people, whether they be linguistic groups, haplogroups, or whatever. But he runs with it. Let me give you an example. The article titled, "Watery Humpback Cattle Pattern in the Rigveda and the First Archaeologically Recorded Route of the Rigvedic Aryans Migration from India to Anatolia," published in the Journal of Agrarian History, investigates a recurring motif in the Rigveda, the image of a watery humpback cattle, often symbolized by the zebu or humped bull. This motif, he argues, serves as both a religious symbol and an important clue in tracing the historical migration routes of Indo-Aryan tribes from the Indus Valley to Anatolia. The study begins by examining the importance of the humpback cattle symbol in the Rigveda, where deities like Vayu, Indra, and Soma are depicted with references to water and bulls, symbolizing fertility, life force, and the sacred connection to water. Simonenko links these depictions to early material culture in the Harappan civilization, where artifacts with images of humped bulls are found from as early as 4000 BCE, aligning with the time frame he proposes for the early Rigvedic hymns. Simonenko provides a chronological and geographical outline of the migration pattern by analyzing archaeological evidence, including ceramic vessels, rhytons, those are drinking vessels, and other artifacts bearing the zebu motif. The evidence tracks the Indo-Aryan presence westward from South Asia through regions like Bactria Margiana, Afghanistan, and Iran before reaching Anatolia around 1000 BCE. The problem with it is that it reads a lot into the humpback cattle motif, assuming, where convenient, the same religious significance for this image across cultures without strong evidence for it. He thinks that simply having a humped bull on a drinking cup is enough. Wherever he finds a humped bull on a drinking cup, he assumes a connection. Not merely a connection by the sharing of ideas or influence, but actual migration of people. He uses this same kind of reasoning in other papers, and as you might imagine, his ideas haven't made any headway in the fields of archaeology or history. Horses. When discussing OIT, you will often see arguments about horses. The reason for this is that the Rig Veda, the earliest Sanskrit text, depicts society as very much a horse-breeding society. Horses feature prominently in it, so OIT proponents think that if they can find some horse bones from Harappan culture, they can more easily claim that Harappan culture and Vedic culture were one and the same. But so far, no reliable evidence of horse remains has been found in South Asia's archaeological sites dating back before the end of the second millennium BCE. Although many claims exist, few include sufficient measurements, drawings, or photographs for independent analysis. Compounding the issue, some of these remains are from archaeological layers that may be much younger than the main artifacts found at sites like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. Identifications, however accurate, are less meaningful if the bones lack well-defined contexts. However, there is no doubt that horses were present in South Asia by at least the end of the first quarter of the second millennium BCE, or possibly by the beginning of the second millennium, as suggested by figurine evidence at Perak and painted pottery from the Swat Valley, both from the early second millennium. But this is right around the time of the proposed Indo-Aryan migration. Claims about horse remains are contested due to the limited quantity of remains and challenges in distinguishing between true horses and other equids, as well as the potential for contamination from later periods in archaeological layers. So current archaeological consensus remains cautious about confirming the presence of true horses in South Asia at this time, and the few relics resembling horses do not conclusively support a 3rd millennium BCE presence in the region. Possible horse representations, such as figurines or terracotta artifacts from Indus Valley sites like Lothal, Kunal, and Surkotada, have sometimes been cited as evidence of horses in South Asia during or prior to the Harappan period. Although some figurines and art suggest horse-like features, they are open to interpretation. Other equids may have existed there at the time. Researchers also note that trade and importation of horses from Central Asia into the region were likely key, supporting the idea that horses became significant in South Asia only in the 2nd millennium BCE. Keep in mind that the presence of a few odd horses in Harappan contexts does not in itself demonstrate that they were a horse-breeding society. Horses can be acquired through trade. If Harappan culture and Vedic culture are identical, we would expect there to be horses found all over Harappan sites, or at least at some sites in large quantities. That being said, it is possible that the scarcity of horse bones may partly be due to environmental conditions, and the Harappans' apparent preference for not using horses in burials, which contributes to their limited presence in the archaeological record. Absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence, but from an archaeozoological perspective, we have no evidence of horse breeding in Harappan society. I should probably mention the Bhimbetka caves, which are sometimes brought up by OIT proponents. They show images of people riding horses on the walls, and say Bhimbetka has art in it that dates back to the Mesolithic period. But what they leave out, or perhaps don't know, is that the art in the cave comes from a range of time periods, stretching all the way into the historical era. So the images of the people riding horses may very well be, and likely are, from later times. Sinauli chariots. The discovery of chariots at the Sinauli archaeological site in Uttar Pradesh, India, is an intriguing find that some in the OIT camp have latched onto as evidence that the theory of Indo-Aryan migration is wrong. In 2018, the Archaeological Survey of India unearthed several chariots from burial sites at Sinauli dating roughly to 2000 to 1800 BCE. The chariots were found alongside copper helmets, swords, shields, and other artifacts in burial pits, indicating a high level of craftsmanship and metalworking skills in this ancient society. The chariots were decorated with copper fittings and adorned with geometric patterns, suggesting both functionality and a ritualistic or symbolic purpose. The construction of these chariots appears to have been lightweight and two-wheeled, designed for speed and agility, potentially for use in warfare or ceremonial purposes. Some have argued that this discovery suggests an indigenous development of chariot technology rather than it being a direct import from Western or Central Asia. Others see it as potential evidence of cultural exchange or influence from outside the region. Still others argue that these weren't chariots at all, but two-wheeled wagons driven by oxen. No horse remains, you see, were found on site. I think the context points more towards the idea that these are war chariots, and it is indeed true that the Sinauli finds suggest that a more advanced technology was in the Indian subcontinent earlier than previously thought, challenging existing theories about the diffusion of chariot technology. But the date of the chariots, around 1900 BCE, places them in the late Harappan period or the early Vedic age. Even if the people here had horses and chariots of the Indo-European style, it is still within the general time frame usually given for the Indo-Aryan migration into the region, though perhaps a wee bit earlier. But then there is the question of whether they are Indo-Aryan chariots at all. Horse-driven chariots of the Indo-European style have spoked wheels, and although the Sinauli chariots have decoration resembling spokes, they are in fact solid wheels, and there are no elements at the site that I'm aware of that would conclusively characterize it as an Indo-European or Indo-Aryan site. Hopefully, forthcoming excavations will reveal more. So as you can see, the archaeological evidence for the out-of-India theory is decidedly lacking. If you think I've left something important out, please let me know. For now, I think we can all conclude that archaeology neither proves nor disproves the theory of Indo-Aryan migration, and it neither proves nor disproves the out-of-India theory. When it comes to theories about language, it is the field of linguistics that will prove to be the most important, while other fields, such as archaeology, history, genetics, and archaeoastronomy, may help us fill in some of the gaps. If you haven't yet seen my discussion about the genetic evidence, please see my video on that. I will leave a link below. You might like my little e-booklet, Why Ancient History Matters. It's designed to persuade people that the subject is important, even in the modern world. You might also wish to use it to help spread the word, so feel free to share it with someone you know. It's free for anyone who wants it. I've left a link in the description box below the video for you to grab a copy. Catch you later.